What's it like to campaign for party office? What is the state committee? And is the New York State Committee pushing the New York Democratic Party to the left? We're going to find out on this episode of Not Suitable for Democracy. Welcome to Not Suitable for Democracy. My name is Nick Hobby and I'm your host. And today we're going to be talking about campaigning, what's it like to run for office, and state committee. Some of these positions you might not have heard of, but to help me explain everything is my good friend, John Scott. How you doing?
Everybody.
How you doing today, John?
I'm doing really well. How's it going? My name is John. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the state committee member representing parts of Astoria, Jackson Heights, Corona, Woodside, East Elmhurst, all within 8034.
Oh, wow. Look at that. How long have you been in the area?
I've lived in Astoria now for almost 9 years.
9 years.
But I've lived in New York for about 13.
Oh, she's a New Yorker now.
She's a New Yorker now. Yeah, love the neighborhood. I've lived here quite a long time.
Oh, wow. I have to say, I actually love this shirt, by the way.
Thank you.
Inspiration?
The inspiration is Ruth Bader Ginsburg dissent collar.
There you go.
I figured it's appropriate, especially given our current political climate, and it's my little act of resistance.
There you go. We all love a good act of resistance, right? So with that said, speaking of acts of resistance, campaign life. Tell me all about how you first got involved with campaigning.
Yeah, I think I've always really loved politics. I've always loved politics for the act of creating a better world for us all. I grew up in a household that was super, super Catholic, and while I'm not Catholic anymore, I think it still really informs my worldview. And I think
Moral compass.
Moral compass for sure, and I think it was that social justice leaning of the Catholic Church and the Jesuits specifically. I went to Fordham here in New York City for college. But yeah, I think I've always really loved politics, and I've loved the aspect of changing the world. And I was in high school during the Bush administration, George W. Bush, post 9/11.
Okay.
And I think that really shaped my worldview. I think their policies on the environment, their policies on queer rights, their policies across the globe when it came to foreign policy, I think really was pivotal in shaping my political consciousness.
Oh, yeah, a whole generation.
A whole generation for sure. And I think that was kind of the moment where I really, as somebody who cared deeply about the world, cared deeply about social justice, that was the moment where I started to really pay attention to politics. I was that insufferable high schooler with the jacket with all of the political pins on it, like the anti-George Bush pins.
There you go. Gotta start somewhere.
Gotta start somewhere. And I think I started at a really young age. And that was kind of my first foray into politics.
Wow. So with that journey, how did you get involved in local politics?
I think I have always been really involved in politics just in general. When I was in high school growing up in Connecticut, I was the president of the Young Democrats Club. I worked on mayoral races. I worked on assembly races. So I always was kind of involved. But there was a hiatus. There was a hiatus that I took in my 20s to kind of focus on myself and my career, which at the time I worked as a zookeeper and an animal trainer, so something not remotely political. But I think what really changed was just what was going on in the country.
Wow.
During the first Trump administration, I think I was really radicalized, for lack of a better word, not in a storming the Capitol sense, but it really, I don't know, it really impacted me. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic especially impacted me.
So if you don't mind, just remind me, when you first moved to Astoria, what year was that? And then in terms of local politics, what time frame?
Yeah, it was 2017 when I moved. So I moved in 2017.
Okay.
And got kind of more involved post 2018, and then especially with 2020.
So you got your toes wet,
Yes.
thinking about it, and then your next big step. What was your first big endeavor getting into local politics? Was it volunteering, organizing? How did you begin?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think actually began through you.
Oh, that's right. Honestly, you're actually totally right. Where once upon a time, on behalf of some of the organizers from AOC's campaign, I was tasked with trying to find more folks in the community who would be open to just organizing, volunteering, and really supporting AOC's, at that point, would have been, I guess it was 2020.
2020?
Yeah, her 2020 campaign. So with that said, there's a great Facebook group out there where there's a lot of Astoria locals, and put out a post saying, hey, is anyone interested in volunteering? And lo and behold, the one person who commented This guy
It was
right
radio.
here.
Yeah, I think honestly at the time I was working as a zookeeper, and we, because of the pandemic, were working 1 week on, 1 week off to minimize like disease transfer between the teams. So I had quite a bit of time, and in 2020 the world was burning around us.
Yeah.
So I really was kind of inspired to go back to my roots and to go back to some political organizing. And no better time to do it than 2020.
Of
And
course.
because of you, got involved with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's re-election campaign in 2020 through one of her organizers, Patrick, who is one of my favorite people on her campaign, and started just knocking doors, talking to community members. At that time, it was a lot of lit dropping because you couldn't really have events.
6 feet away, right?
Exactly, social distancing. And it was a really great foray into local politics. It was a great foray into New York politics, and nowhere to go but up from there. 2020 was a rough year to organize politically, and it's significantly easier now. Not that it's ever easy, but it was a really great year to kind of get my feet wet in New York.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing. And I think we need to be sharing these stories because, hey, it took one person to find a comment on Facebook, right? To then make that connection, get involved, and then the next step, that was only the beginning of your journey.
Yeah.
After organizing, volunteering for AOC, what did you wind up doing next?
Yeah, it's a great question. After AOC's 2020 campaign, I actually kind of stayed involved with her campaign because they would keep staff on. We would do deep canvases. We actually were doing deep canvases around the Green New Deal.
Oh, great.
So, yeah, knocking neighbors' doors. Instead of trying to get a bunch of doors all at once, the goal was to have really profound, deep, longer duration conversations with your neighbors about how they felt about the Green New Deal, how they felt about environmental issues. And my background is political. I have a degree in political science, but I also have a degree in environmental studies and a master's in biology. So that was kind of very much in my wheelhouse. So continue to work with the campaign and volunteer with the campaign. And also started volunteering with Tiffany Caban, who's our city council member here in Astoria.
That's right.
On her campaign in 2021.
Yeah.
And then ended up running myself for a lower level kind of party office in 2022. So we started getting our feet wet with campaigns and then threw my hat in the ring and ran myself.
Wow. Okay, so let's just recap, right? We're going through the pandemic, volunteering, making sure that we're organizing along the way, meeting new people. And while you may be joining one campaign, it looks like John even joined Tiffany Caban's campaign. And by doing more and more organizing work, you learn more about the community, the issues on the ground. And then it gets to a point where, you're doing the work, you've got the skills, you're definitely a leader. And then you decide to run for office? What office was that?
Yeah, so I ran for state committee. So New York State Democratic Committee is the full title.
So, well, do you get paid for that? How does that work?
It's a great question. I wish I got paid for it. No, it's a completely volunteer office.
That's right.
So we run, by fundraising, we run on our own dime essentially, and it's in addition to my 9-to-5 job. So it is completely volunteer.
So that is an incredible uptake, and the fact that you're doing it volunteer, unpaid work. And what is your intent with doing this unpaid work? Why?
I think the reason that I ran again for re-election, and the reason I'm doing the work is to positively impact my community. I think in politics right now, we're seeing kind of this like maelstrom. We're seeing this storm of things that are happening.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a couple different pieces, to pick apart. I think we're seeing a government, whether it is state committee or the Senate, that is disproportionately represented by folks of a certain age. And that doesn't necessarily mean that their values can't align with ours, but as a now 34-year-old gay man, I was not seeing myself represented to the same degree as people of a certain age in politics. And I think it was really important to have younger representation, even on the lower levels, even in party offices.
Absolutely.
So that was reason number one. I also deeply care about several issues, the environment being one of them, LGBTQ rights being the other, and just creating a more affordable New York as somebody that, graduated during the Great Recession, as somebody that has kind of seen economic turmoil over and over and over.
Yeah.
And New York become increasingly more unaffordable. That was another huge reason that I ran. And I think that, just government in general, I think a lot of times is not as effective as it could be.
That's right.
It's not as progressive. It's not swinging as big as we possibly can be. And I think that really inspired me to run because if anybody who knows me, I'm very spicy. I like to swing for the fences. And I think I was like, I can utilize my personality, I could utilize my talents, and I can utilize my passions for the betterment of my community.
That is amazing. So even just, you called it out, right? The fact that we are in a place right now where our government is not suitable for democracy. Am I right? So the fact that someone took it on their behalf to utilize their skill set, what they're able to do to push forward policies and ideas to create a vision that encompasses not only the community, but everyone, which goes nationwide. So I just want to take a step back now, because I know that party office may not be familiar to so many folks out there. What is party office, and why would someone volunteer and not get paid for the work that they're doing, right? So how does party office impact public office? And is this something that is only in New York, or is it nationwide? Do you mind sharing a little more about party office?
Yeah, of course. It's a really, really good question. So we are the New York State Democratic Committee. We are a apparatus of the New York State Democratic Party. And the state committee is responsible for a couple different things.
Okay.
It's responsible for like internal party business.
Right.
It's also responsible for setting the party platform. And I think for me, that was the piece that really intrigued me.
Right.
Because looking at the Democratic Party's platform, plenty that I agree with. I've been a lifelong Democrat. But there were things that could be tweaked. There were things that could be changed.
It's never perfect.
It's never perfect. There's always room for improvements. And for me, that was kind of the key piece where I was like, you can do a lot of really important work with that party platform. So for instance, when we meet, and we meet several times a year,
Right.
we pass resolutions. Some of those resolutions can just be like housekeeping. Some of it could be procedural. Some of them can be policy-based.
One quick question. So if you're passing resolutions and they're policy-based, is the state committee, they're not passing bills, are they?
It's a great question. No, we're not passing bills.
Okay.
So the legislature, the assembly, and the state senate are the ones that are able to pass bills in New York State that
Right,
then
okay.
theoretically get signed into law. We pass, they are legally binding resolutions
Okay.
where it says the New York State Democratic Party believes A, B, C, and D. And then if they're more policy-based, it provides a little bit of weight and a little bit of oomph for the legislature to then get those bills across the finish line.
And how many members make up the state committee? Because then, to your point, if there's a decent number and the resolution is passed that's more policy focused, right? Wouldn't that, in a sense, also push or guide or advocate for whatever policy vision that the legislature has in mind? Where do the two connect, and how many folks are in the body again?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are 2 representatives from each assembly district. So approximately 300 in state committee. And traditionally, it had been 1 male, 1 female representative per assembly district. Now it's just 2 people of differing genders.
We love being inclusive in New York.
Period. So there's approximately 300 of us from all over New York State. And then we pass these resolutions. There is weight behind it, because if it's passing, theoretically, it's passing with the backing of folks from Albany, folks from Buffalo, folks from the Capital Region.
That's right, all over
Queens.
the state. That's wonderful. Oh my goodness. So now, folks at home, if they have never even heard of, a state committee or who their member is, how would they start to, what's the first step for finding that information out?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The first step is to go to the New York State Democratic Party's website, because they list all of our names. They list a little bit of information about what we do, but there's not a ton out there. And I think that that's the biggest hurdle, especially when campaigning, is to explain what you're doing, explain why it's important, when there's not a ton of information out there just in general for folks.
Sounds like there's a lot of opportunity to potentially get involved.
Yeah, of course. It's interesting because with state committee, downstate versus upstate, they're greatly different. Downstate, these are highly competitive offices that you are running for.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, when I ran in 2022 for my first term, I ran against 2 other people. So there were 3 of us.
Three-way race.
Three-way race.
Usually don't hear about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So a 3-way race. There were 2 other folks that I was running against. One was the incumbent. I was kind of the scrappy underdog in that race. But upstate, a lot of times they don't have anybody that are like interested in running for these offices, and they end up getting appointed by county committee, by the state party. So I would encourage anybody to run. Obviously in New York City and downstate, it's going to be highly competitive. You're going to have somebody that you were either running against to unseat, or as the incumbent, you are running against. But if you live in more rural areas of New York, especially upstate, I would highly encourage you to get involved, because in a lot of these like rural counties, they're really looking for folks, especially young folks, to get involved and run.
That is such great advice. So with all of that, I know you mentioned getting involved. Can you at least share a little bit about your own journey in state committee? We know you decided to run. You have amazing vision and backing in terms of just your motivation to get across the finish line. So 3 people in the primary. You've never ran for office before.
First time.
How did all of this come together, and what was your experience like?
Yeah, so I made the decision to run at a very interesting time, to say the very least. We were currently going through the redistricting process.
Oh, that's right.
So when I first decided to run, the assembly districts looked completely different than the assembly district, that ended up coming to fruition during actually the race, during that 6 months that I was running.
Yeah.
So that was the first step. It was like kind of a shifting landscape, which made it very challenging.
And that's why you fill out the census form. 2020 census is what determined the new shapes of the district.
And for a long time, the district was all of Astoria. It was kind of a square.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And I live in the most northern part of Astoria, which is the most northwestern neighborhood in Queens. And the northern part actually got redistricted, and now the district that I represent looks like a Z.
Interesting formation.
Yes.
Isn't a little gerrymandering going on, maybe?
I mean, what's a little gerrymandering these days?
It's worse in Texas. I mean, we've all seen that image, right? Oof, but yeah.
But yeah, so the landscape was constantly shifting when I decided to run. And it was interesting volunteering and working on campaigns prior, where you're advocating for somebody else. You're saying, the congresswoman believes A, B, C, and D. Our city council member believes A, B, C, and D. It's very different when you're the candidate and you're saying, I believe this. And I think it's easier. I think it's easier because you can just say what you believe and you can speak very freely and candidly. But it's also incredibly vulnerable when you are the candidate.
That's such a good point.
Because if people have an issue with what you're saying, they have an issue with you.
Yeah.
They don't have necessarily an issue with, some amorphous person that they don't know, that they're just kind of like rambling to you about. They have an issue with what you're saying. And it's highly vulnerable, especially in those moments when you're on the street canvassing and somebody has a bone to pick with you.
I was just going to ask that. So when you're out canvassing or even campaigning for yourself for an unpaid party position, how do you A, explain the role, but then B, if anyone does disagree with the platform, how have you handled those situations?
Yeah, I think honesty is the best policy. I think that in life, and I definitely think that with campaigning too. I think people can really sense authenticity.
Oh, that's key. Yep.
Like they can sense whether you're like BSing them, or they can sense if you are being real.
Especially in New York, no one's going to take BS.
Of course. So I think that authenticity is key. And just saying, hey, yeah, I don't know a ton about that issue, but I'm willing to listen to you. What do you have to say? What do you think?
Right.
I think is really key. And just showing up and just listening. Because half of campaigning is listening. Because people, I think, especially in New York, New Yorkers love to talk.
Oh my gosh, all the time.
I mean, case in point.
Right?
New Yorkers love to talk, and I think a lot of times they just want to be heard. They just want to communicate the problems that they're having. They're communicating their concerns, their worries to you, and your job is just to kind of take that in and absorb it.
So with all of that, we are both openly gay men.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious to see how that may have played a role in your campaign experience, also from voters, and what was the overall impact that it's had on the community?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I am a very open and out, proud gay man, and I am really lucky and blessed to represent a district that has a ton of queer people.
You sure do.
Astoria and Jackson Heights, there's a lot of us. So I never felt like it was an issue on the campaign trail. I did get a lot of unsolicited advice when I was deciding to run. And I had people who I love and care about in my life talk about, well, maybe you don't want to run as openly out as a gay man as you are. My campaign colors, all of my branding was not so subtly based off of the Silence Equals Death campaign from the ACT UP organization in the 80s. And so pink triangles,
There you go.
pink and black were my campaign colors.
That's right. Solid motif that stood out from the crowd.
It's solid motif that stood out for the crowd. And for queer people, it was like a beacon of like, okay, he's one of us. And I think a lot of straight people were like, well, he just loves the color pink.
Fair enough.
But, you know, I was advised, again, by people that I love and people that I trust that maybe I would want to tone down the gay stuff.
But did you tone it down?
God, no.
No. And I guess at the end of the day, right, you managed to navigate your identity through your first time running for office as a state committee member. And what was the result?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really key piece is something that you brought up in one of your other episodes about identity politics, where I think as a gay man, it's not the reason that folks should vote for me. However, that experience does impact the way that I view policy. It impacts the way that I view government. It impacts the way that I relate to others in my community.
Absolutely.
So I think it's frankly advantageous. And I think in my office as state committee member, I've been really cognizant and very aware of the fact that I would say, one of the more open and out queer people in state committee. And, you know, off the bat, the first resolution that I introduced was about queer inclusive curriculum in New York State. So making sure that, you know, we were kind of out the gate fighting for our community. And again, I had people that told me not to lead with that. Are you sure in this political climate, that's the first thing that you want to do out the gate? And the answer was yes.
And at the end of the day, as much as their intentions were probably good and to protect you, well, it didn't really matter because you won your first election. How amazing is that? The fact that you're probably one of the first LGBTQ plus state committee members for this district, 8034. That is so momentous. So once you won, you heard the news. What was your initial feeling? We all saw the video of AOC when she found out she first won. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think there were a couple of feelings involved. I think the first was relief.
Relief.
I think the entire time I was campaigning, I didn't want to let folks down. I didn't want to let Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Jessica González-Rojas, our assembly member. I was really relieved because I didn't want to let them down. Or even family and friends who supported me. I didn't want to let anybody down. So it was that immediate relief of like, oh, I did it.
You didn't. No one wanted the Tyra Banks meme. We were rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. But
Literally.
no, we were rooting for John. And it worked out.
No, but for real though, there was immediate relief, and then the next kind of wave was just pure excitement.
Yes.
And then
Bliss.
the wave after that was, okay, we got to get to work. We got lots to do in 2 years, and we got to hit the ground running.
Wow. I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in to Not Suitable for Democracy. I truly appreciate the support, and if you like what you hear and want to learn more, well, then just follow Not Suitable for Democracy and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you'd like to learn more and go deeper on today's episode, then make sure to subscribe to my Substack, nsfdpod.substack.com. Or if you'd like to message me with any questions, feel free to reach out on Instagram, and you can follow me at nsfd_pod. Your journey is just so inspirational. I want to just commend you for sharing all of that. So after that journey, I know you mentioned you hit the ground running once you were at the state committee. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so the first resolution that I introduced was a resolution in support of queer inclusive curriculum for New York State. So there are multiple bills actually in the Assembly and the Senate that are trying to institute queer inclusive curriculum.
Okay.
So making sure that our stories are told in New York State curriculum in their history classes in a way that's obviously age appropriate. You know, when you're talking about, you know, the civil rights movement, you're talking about Prohibition, you're talking about the New Deal, you're also talking about Stonewall, you're talking about Harvey Milk, you're talking about kind of our queer elders. And New York is an outlier in the fact that we don't have a version of that when states like New Jersey, Connecticut, Nevada, California all have versions of it.
That's right. I'll even share too. Once upon a time, I was actually a volunteer for GLSEN, the Gay and Lesbian Student Education Network. So during that whole experience, right, we were, you know, educating young leaders in high school to make sure that they could come up with and write the curriculum and taking on the inspiration of, you know, as you mentioned, Harvey Milk and Stonewall and just real and really shedding a light on LGBTQ plus rights and also movements that have been happening that often don't get shared. And when we don't tell our stories, not only are they forgotten, but sometimes erased from history. So
Yeah, and I think like for me, this is what I wanted to lead on because I think far too often we are erased in history. And I think it's difficult to build power and it's difficult to show impact without having that history. Queer people have always been at the forefront of culture. They've been at the forefront, frankly, of politics.
that's right.
And without having that history that is widely disseminated, widely taught, it's all too easy to erase us and throw us kind of back in the closet, frankly.
And we're not going back.
We are not going back.
No, we're not.
And I was really lucky that I had the support and, frankly, the insight of Danny Drum, former city council member, open and out gay man who worked pretty heavily in New York City on queer inclusive curriculum. And being able to pick his brain about the pitfalls, what's going to go right, what's going to go wrong was incredibly helpful.
You had amazing guidance.
Amazing guidance, for sure. So the resolution that I introduced was in support of those bills passing. And it was, the goal was to provide that backing from the state party to be like, hey, we support this.
So in terms of backing from the state party, how did you navigate like whipping support for your queer inclusive curriculum bill or resolution amongst 300 plus people?
Yeah, and the majority of them, I'm assuming, were not a part of the queer community, right?
I mean, there's facts.
Yeah. Frankly, it was difficult, and we faced a lot of opposition from the state party. And it wasn't opposition based on the subject matter. It was opposition based off of fear that the Republicans were going to weaponize this against us. It wasn't necessarily that it was about LGBTQ rights. They were worried that this was going to be something on Fox News. It was going to be something that was going to be weaponized against the party and have the party lose elections. The direct quote was, we're focused on winning in 2024, and we can't have the Republicans use this against us. As a very spicy person and somebody who does not like to be told what to do, I took a lot of umbrage, frankly, in that. And I, was able to, in my frustration, speak very clearly about the fact that we're focused on not only winning in 2024, but in 2028 and decades later. And as the world changes and more people are identifying and self-identifying as a part of the queer community, if we're not showing our support to that community, it's only going to bite us in the butt in the long term. So even with some hesitation and some opposition from the state party, we were able to get it passed, which was huge.
What were maybe some of the key drivers to convincing people who are hesitant and fearful? What do you think finally put them over the edge to say, I will support this resolution?
Frankly, I don't think it was necessarily even a comment from me. So for resolutions in state committee, they have to go to the executive committee first.
Okay.
And the executive committee either recommends it for passage or it doesn't recommend it for passage. If they don't recommend it, it's essentially a death sentence.
Right.
And this resolution originally was not recommended for passage by the executive committee.
Okay.
I threw down, I got a little spicy in the meeting, but it actually was another member of the executive committee, a member of the queer community who, after one of the other members made a comment about there not being any queer people in their district, this other member was like, we're everywhere. We are in every district, whether you are upstate, downstate, Queens, Manhattan, or the most rural county in New York.
Sounds like a Republican talking point where they want to believe there's no queer people in the Republican districts, which we all know that is absolutely not true.
And I think it was that comment of recognizing that we are everywhere and we are their constituents in all corners of the state.
A very organized constituency, might I say.
Of course, queer people are the most organized. And I think it was that comment, honestly, that really tipped the needle and swayed their hand. We actually got them to reverse course in executive committee, and it was passed on the floor.
That's amazing. Incredible. Congratulations on your incredible work.
Thank you.
Was that your first
That was my first resolution. Second resolution.
Oh, there's more.
There's more. There's two more.
Look at that.
So the second resolution was about environmental justice and green renewal. So it was about addressing discrepancies based on neighborhoods, whether it was tree coverage, park space, clean air based on communities that were historically redlined.
Really?
So communities that were historically redlined, that are historic communities of color, oftentimes have less access to trees, park space, and then have more heat-related deaths. They have more asthma. And you see it across the state, but frankly across the country as well, too.
This is how we connect the dots from not just a resolution, but to policy and then improving people's lives.
Exactly. Exactly. And it, very much was in tandem with bills that were in the Assembly and in the Senate supporting those. But it was a kind of more broad resolution than queer inclusive curriculum, which was very specific.
Right.
And then the third was another very specific resolution on the New York Heat Act, which attempted to limit the energy costs that New Yorkers have to pay out of pocket.
I mean, no one likes those Con Ed bills. Am I right? Like, come on.
No, they're the absolute worst.
They're price gouging us at every left and right turn.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest struggles in state committee, once you're in office, is that the party is very hesitant to have state committees seem like they are legislating.
Ah, right. Telling them what to do, having too much of a say. Okay, interesting.
Exactly. So in this resolution, they were worried that by calling out the New York Heat Act by name, that we were pushing a little bit too hard, and we were kind of stepping outside of our mandate and where we kind of need to be as a body and as an organization.
So one quick thing, that's an interesting point, where if they're concerned with how how the state committee is advocating for certain policies specifically, then what is the difference then having a constituent or like a huge mass of hundreds of thousands of constituents calling their legislator and really advocating for the same thing?
It's frankly no different.
Right.
It's no different. We are elected by our assembly districts to represent the Democrats in their assembly district. It's no different than, 30 people calling their office about the New York Heat Act. I think it's just an overall concern, and I think that's where the art of being in that office comes into play, where you have to draft these resolutions that are broad enough that they are palatable and it doesn't seem like you're overstepping, but concrete enough that they have some teeth and they have some backing, and that it is specific enough that they know what you're referencing and what bills you're referencing.
And where do you draw the line? Because I'm sure progressives would want us to push as far as we can, as much as we can, and don't give them an inch because they will take a mile. So where have you found to draw the line, not only within the resolutions that you've put forward, but where you've seen it so far in your experience in state committee?
Yeah, as a young progressive, I swing for the fences. And I think that is my role in state committee, as somebody that is in a very left district, as somebody who...
We have to go left.
We have to go left. And politically leaning, like I am on the farther left side of the spectrum. And I recognize that that's my role to play in state committee. There are folks who are in more conservative rural areas that are not as progressive as I am. And that's no shade. That's, it's everyone plays a different role.
Meeting them where they're at. Yeah.
Is to swing.
Great.
Is to swing big. But
swing left.
So swing left.
There you go.
My goal and my role is to swing left. But I think I never let perfect be the enemy of the good.
That's so important these days.
And while I'm swinging for a mile, I'll take an inch if that's all I can get. So with the New York Heat Act, for example, I knew in executive committee this was not going to be recommended. This was not going to be passed. And there was a lot of kind of back and forth between me and senior members of the party. And I knew it wasn't going to pass. And what we ended up doing is we softened the language.
Okay.
We made the New York Heat Act mention of that bill specifically a little bit weaker, a little bit further removed, but I knew I was not going to get that mile. But I'm like, you know what? Maybe I can get a quarter mile, and that's still a whole lot better than what we came into this meeting.
Yeah, I mean, even just from the first resolution, the fact that if the LGBTQ plus curriculum resolution was never passed, that also made the rounds in the media, right? I think that even sends a message that, state committee is holding its ground on values. So if we didn't get anything, there's no way to highlight, there's no way to highlight the work that's being done. B, it's showing that, okay, why are we electing 300 plus people if they're just sitting on their thumbs, too scared to promote or advocate for anything? And then C, it might not be perfect. It might not be that full mile. But as we saw with this most recent election, if we don't get everything we want, we're swinging in the complete opposite direction, and we can't afford to do that because we're just losing progress.
Yeah.
So
Well,
even those baby steps are progress, as much as it might not be where we want to be. At least it gets us closer to there than it was ever before.
absolutely. And with the queer inclusive curriculum resolution, I can't claim really any credit for like the media afterwards. I had an incredibly talented colleague, Nick, who
Not me.
another Nick in Queens politics.
That's right.
Who was able to kind of work his magic. And we had a tremendous amount of media coverage around that resolution. And while at the end of the day, those bills didn't pass in the legislature, they're still being reintroduced every single year.
Oh, gosh.
The fact that we were able to shine such a bright spotlight on that issue, that we were able to hold a magnifying glass at a time where we were seeing neo-Nazis come to drag story hours and queer issues were very intensely contested and hotly debated. I think it was really important, and I'm really proud of the work that we did. Even when Fox News name dropped my name and talked about it. And
Wait, they name dropped your name on Fox News?
Yep.
I didn't know that. Oh my goodness. Oh, so breaking news. Wait, so
yeah,
we all know Fox News, and some people may be watching it thinking, sure, that's just their taste of butter for the day. But we all know that it does come with a lot of extra baggage. Were there any ramifications from being publicly mentioned by Rupert Murdoch's like conservative meme machine?
So after being mentioned in Fox News, after a lot of kind of press and media around this, especially things that mentioned my name, there was definitely a concern about safety. There was a definite concern about safety. There was a moment, frankly, where I questioned, like, am I going to be able to make it through this? Especially at the time that we were living in 2023, where nationally we were seeing a lot of anti-queer hate.
This is where they were attacking like the Target stores even, I think.
It was a very, very tense time for our country, especially for LGBTQ rights.
Right.
And there were moments where I was frankly worried, but at the end of the day, I think somebody has to be at the tip of the spear for this, right? And we have had our queer elders, whether it was Marsha P. Johnson, whether it was Harvey Milk, whether it was Abraham Lincoln, and they were always at the tip of the spear. And I'm like, in my small way, if I'm at the tip of the spear for this, it's going to be worth it.
Right. And this is how we pay it forward, because if you made it if the sacrifice you made couldn't be just a little bit better for the next person growing up, then at least that way we just created a better world, and that was the end goal.
Absolutely.
So your work was worthwhile.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful.
And the work is just getting started.
Oh, yeah, that is very true. Just getting started. And you know what? I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today, having this conversation, sharing so much great insight about state committee campaigning. And, before we sign off, I just want to ask, what is your advice for maybe someone listening or watching who would be interested in getting involved? What's their first step, or maybe even running for office? Advice to them.
Yeah, do it is the short answer. I think we need more people involved in politics, and we especially need more progressive, more young, more queer people in politics. So my advice is just do it. Not to steal a corporation's catchphrase and slogan, but my advice is to just put yourself out there. And that can look 1,000 different ways. It could look like knocking a door. It could look like phone banking while you're walking your dog in the evening. It could look like volunteering on a campaign as an organizer, or it can look like you running yourself for office. And there are offices like county committee, school boards, state committee,
that's right.
Things that are on the lower level that you can run for, especially like county committee, that you only need to collect signatures of the neighbors on your block. So there are small ways that you can run and make a huge difference. You just got to do it. And I have faith in everybody that is interested in politics, but I also just have faith in young people nowadays, because I think we are so keyed in. I think especially millennials are really bucking the trend of getting more conservative as you age.
Oh yeah, we stopped that.
We certainly did stop that. So I think, put down the phone, stop doom scrolling the New York Times.
Gosh, I'm like so bad at that. But that's why we've had the podcast.
No more Insta stories, and get out there and knock some doors and talk to your neighbors and talk to some folks.
Excellent advice. John, thank you so much for joining us today. And if anyone has any questions about running for office, where can they reach you?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me, first and foremost. But if you'd like to hit me up or like to reach out or just kind of follow the state committee journey, you can follow me at John Scott for Queens on all social media handles.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John.
Thanks for having me.
And that's our show. Thank you so much for tuning in to Not Suitable for Democracy. I hope you learned a lot from what John had to say. And if you'd like to learn more, make sure to follow him at John Scott for Queens on Instagram. And if you'd like to follow up with more on this show, make sure to check out my Substack at nsfdpod.substack.com. And make sure you tune in for more episodes for Not Suitable for Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And remember, democracy is not suitable without you.